Okay, hello everybody out there in Mix Land and Nilofer Land. Really, I think that's why everyone's here. We're having a little bit of a funky internet experience this morning, so we'll try to bear with it, and if we have problems broadcasting, we'll muddle through. Most importantly, I'm so delighted to have Nilofer Merchant here with us today for a Maverick Hangout, specifically on the challenges of leading and innovating and creating value in this social era that we're all trying to navigate today. Nilofer is an amazing creature in the sense that she has deep in the trenches operational experience from big companies like Apple and Autodesk to startups in Silicon Valley. And she manages to be a really capacious thinker when it comes to all these big issues. And her ideas and her perspectives are, to my mind, remarkably coherent, deep, soulful, and yet incredibly gritty and practical. So we are so lucky to have her here to delve into some of the themes of the unlimited human potential challenge, of which Nilofer is a judge. And you know, we really are thinking about how do we get more clever, more inventive about constantly unearthing, unleashing, cultivating, aggregating, and appropriately rewarding human contribution. And she's written books about this. She thinks about this. It's part of her body of work. So Nilofer, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I do want to say one bit of housekeeping. We have a lively Twitter feed already going on. If you have any questions or comments for Nilofer, we'll spend time doing Q&A at the end. Hashtag Mix Hangout would be great. So Nilofer, I want to dive right in. I mentioned this notion of the social era. Your latest book is 11 Rules for Creating Value in the Social Era. Social is a word that I think is probably neck and neck with innovation when it comes to being used and abused in the business lexicon. What, place us in this moment of time. What do you mean when you talk about social, and what are some of the big shifts we need to sort of understand when you talk about this social era?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is I think about social in the biggest way social is. And I mean, I feel sort of sad in some ways it's been co-opted, in sort of business jargon, because social is how you and I interact, right? It's how I would first walk up to you, maybe shake your hand, and of course virtually smile. There's ways in which people first meet and then develop a relationship and then go deeper and trust each other and so on. And there's constructs that work for that. Well, I think that human element that allows you and I to engage one another and feel connected to one another is the same thing that can now apply to how we actually go about the process of creating value. It's not this mechanistic, industrial era kind of thing where people are simply cogs in a machine. And that has a ton of implications. First, and probably the most profound, is the idea that each of us can do work that matters, and that we have either through entrepreneurship and other vehicles or technology, because those are all vehicles, right? But the fundamental thing that all human beings have always wanted to do is have work that matters. Now, the idea of doing that in the industrial era, let's say as a worker on the manufacturing line at Ford, even circa 1950, people would laugh. People would be like, that's not a job that can have meaning. And yet today, most of us are really seeing the possibility that that can exist. So that's what I'm actually talking to in terms of really, really broad stroke when I say social. And so social is more than media. Social is more than social business. And the one thing I really made a distinction on in this body of work and my thesis is that connected people can now do what once only large centralized organizations could. And that has, just to pull on that thread for a little second, the reason of the firm, the thesis of the firm that Ronald Coase said, I don't know, gosh, it's been like 80 years or something. It's been a long time. Sorry for not getting that specific right. But he actually said, the reason firms exist is because they're more efficient with a whole bunch of people together. And I'm like, not sure that's actually true anymore. Maybe for things where you still need capital, where you still own land, where there's, sort of scale, it matters. But in a whole bunch of different situations in the knowledge economy, it doesn't. That's kind of interesting because it changes what forms advantage or competitive advantage. So it has implications, of course, for business models, and then it has implications for how do each of us find work that matters and allows us to have a bigger dent in the world, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean that I think this notion of the social era almost being the human era is so profound, and that's something I want to get to and really unpack as we get deeper into this conversation. But you just immediately got to something that I think is so important, which is, essentially we're trying to do this almost DNA transplant from the industrial era principles and approaches and practices to this new era that you describe so well. And I think, as you say, pulling on that thread a little bit more, what is it that leaders and institutions need to really understand? And I know there's several levers that you talk about when it comes to making this shift, but this is a truly big shift, and I don't think I'm exaggerating to say this is sort of at the DNA level of so many of our organizations. I mean, we talk about that at the Mix. We call it, management innovation is one of our terms, and we really do believe that this is sort of the frontier, but it's not tweaking around the edges. It's not, as you say, getting more likes on Facebook. It's really fundamentally rethinking a set of principles and the deepest approaches to how you do everyday work. So that's a really huge question. But if you were to pick out sort of a handful of levers that we would start with, where would we start?
So I'll tell it through the form of a story. So at some point I had been blogging about some of these ideas, and I got a call through the speakers bureau that I work with that IBM wanted me to come work with them. And I was all excited because I'm like, oh, IBM, one of the greatest companies in the world. I'm like all excited. And they start saying some things that I really believe are true. And I say something like, I believe that too. I totally acted like a 12-year-old in this moment of just, because I'm still just a newbie in a lot of ways about all this stuff. I'm so curious about it as much as anything. So when I hear somebody else resonating with an idea, I'm, like a little kid, like, yes, that's it. And they said, well, we're repeating you back to you, and we think that what you're saying could actually be the axis of growth. And I was like, okay, so what I say, and so it was just an interesting sort of reflection moment back. And the two vectors of growth that I have now sort of seen, distilled more clearly in my own head, because sometimes it's just ideas wandering around. One is that we've moved from a world in which we sell products to a world in which we enable creation of things. So I go from product to platform. And that's tectonic, because then you're not saying I have to make it all myself. It's more, how do I enable a whole bunch of other people to make it, right? That's just sort of how you think about your business model. It moves from a what, like I make this, which is a what, to a how, which in the case of Zappos is about service, or in terms of, there's other companies who are really thinking about not what I produce, but how do I do it, because that changes things. IBM is one of the companies that really, I think, exemplifies how well in the enterprise space. And then, so product platform. And then the other vector is really this idea about, do you have to do it all yourself and be the sort of gorilla of the space, or can you do things by how you bring many participants into the system, so a community of people? And in the book, I use the metaphor of the 800-pound gorilla to the 800 gazelles, that seemingly disparate yet connected individuals can now do what once only large centralized organizations do. So I just think it's about power over, right, which is a very guerrilla model. I will have power and tell you what to do and set price and all that, to power with and enable many participants in the system to think. So one is more about where's the locus of control over or with, and one is more about what are we making, how do we think about that? And so is it a what or a how? And those two vectors of growth end up becoming the two factors or vectors of innovation, because once you start doing both those two at the same time, then you start doing what IBM did in the green space, for example. I'll just use an enterprise example for a second, where they said to a whole bunch of participants, just largely in the sort of eco space, hey, we think we should enter this space. We don't know what we should do, but we think we have something to offer. Help us even define what problem we need to solve, and then how best might we solve it, which is a really interesting, think about just 30 years ago saying that to a bunch of people and saying, by the way, who are we? And what could we do with you? That's a profound vote of confidence in their own ability to sort of create value independently of making the thing it specifically and owning all the control systems.
Yeah. That's really, really helpful clarification. And I want to talk about that question of how you make that shift from the 800-pound gorilla to the 800 gazelles. And as you say, I mean, IBM has been really incredible about sort of reinventing itself and going with each new era that it hits in its over 100-year history now. But I think you say somewhere something that I find so absolutely true when I interact with companies and leaders today, that, everybody wants more innovation. Everybody talks about experimentation. Everybody talks about wanting to have the new. Everybody talks about wanting to empower people and give them meaningful work. Yet we don't want all the risk. We don't want the unpredictability. We don't want to lose control. We don't want to lose efficiency. All the things. So it's sort of the, how can I have my cake and eat it too? I mean, I think in this social world, so many organizations are kind of getting the message, but not necessarily
changing the way.
Exploring
They're not
how.
walking the talk. Yeah. And I think the problem is this, right? And if you just think about it at the most human level, do any of us really like change? We like the outcome of change, right? We like for example, we're about to move to Paris this summer, and we've been planning this for years, and it's taken many, many steps for us to make this decision to move and live abroad for a year. But we're hating every single step of the process, right? We're going, oh my gosh, we have to rent out our house, we have to learn a brand new language. Like we sometimes just get mired in the detail of like, holy crap. And the underlying current of the holy crapness is this: we're worried deeply that somehow we will fail, right? That we will not learn the language, we will look silly, that we will have an experience that is awful, that we will have regrets. Like we're having all these human moments of saying, well, we want the outcome, but we really don't want to give up anything we know in our comfort zone and blah, 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 right? Same is true at business. Just it's the same humanness showing up. We want to be able to say, gosh, I really want to enable all the talent of my people. I mean, like, which leader does not want to do that, right? But they also go, but the Wall Street market says I need to deliver performance tomorrow. So what if I start, quote unquote, letting people lead and then they don't deliver? Oh my gosh, it's my head on the block, right? So there's this thing, and so I think the big thing as I'm working with leaders on this is I say, okay, so if you believe it, then it's about learning how. So just like my move to Paris, it's about learning how. Who's already done this? What are some paths that work? What are incremental steps of progress? And to think about it more as I will pull on the thread. I will learn because I believe in my capacity to learn. And I believe in my people's capacity to grow, and I believe that we can make it through this transom. And I think what most people are saying is the words, and then their heart is not there on this sort of like trust yourself that you can learn, right? And Carol Dweck taught me something recently. Carol Dweck, who wrote Mindset, she talks about fixed mindsets versus flexible mindsets. And I was exploring with her because she's a psychologist. I said, why is it that what's the difference between someone actually, wanting to be a flexible mindset, because that's the key to this whole thing? And she goes, oh, they trust themselves. And I was like, what is it really when you say they trust themselves? What are they saying? And she says, it's that I trust that I will figure it out. I trust I'm resourceful. I trust I will find the right answers. I trust that even if I fail, I will learn how to get back up. And as soon as you believe that about yourself, then it's about being adaptable, and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong the first time. And that to me has really struck me as a deep and profound truth about what it means for leaders to shape, this world.
That's a beautiful insight, and when you take it up to the level in this context you've been talking about, the flexible mindset for an organization is that you have trust in all of the individuals that you brought together, whether they're sort of in the organization or beyond, that they will be resourceful, that they will figure it out, that they will help you think the future together.
Well, and it means you have to do a couple things.
So on that note,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
You go.
So the thing that's different though, right, is instead of saying I trust every one of these people, it's I trust that I can frame the question right. And then I trust that people, if given the right guidance, will want to do the right thing by this business. I trust that people will apply their creative energy in the right direction. So it's not that I say each person at this table, by the way, could replace me as a leader. That's not really what I'm asking you to say as a leader. I'm asking you to say, ask better questions instead of knowing the answer, and trust that in framing the question right, you can get more people to participate in the problem solving. And then trust that people actually want to solve that problem with you, because by the way, it's in their best interest too, and so what you're doing is shifting very, very small mechanisms. They're not huge, they're not as tectonic as they look from way back in the world. It's thinking about, okay, what is it I really need to do differently?
So sorry for the ambient noise out there. So when you let me push on that a little bit more, because I sort of at the start of your new book, and a lot of this conversation around the social era, and creating a thriving organization, and also being a thriving, successful individual contributor, comes down to this base unit of connection, connecting people together. So instead of thinking about, an institution's scale and power, it's more about what can you build out of individuals connecting together, or connections in general. So when you talk about that, what do you mean? Help us unpack that, because I think it's such a core piece of the puzzle here. I mean, you at one point talk about connections and relationships as almost like, falling in love. These are messy, complicated human things, and it's not, again, the language of likes and tweets and I've got X number of people in my network. It's truly about relationships.
Yeah, so I'll use just a very personal story to kind of bring it home. So my husband several years ago came to me and said, by the way, I don't want to do things that matter, and I want to solve, and this was the exact phrase, world peace. And I looked at him and I remember just thinking, okay, first of all, you've lost your, marbles, because somebody has to, like, pay the mortgage and have stability and health insurance and stuff. And I just looked at him like, first of all, I had no idea what world peace even looks like. And I was sort of like, yeah, seems like you're just sort of chasing a rainbow, right? And he said, no, I'm really going to think about how to have an impact and do something meaningful. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's got to be something different than what I know. But I got to be able to apply these knowledge and talent and all this stuff. And he was originally thinking, like, go off and get a PhD. And to which I just shook my head. And he ended up going online, forming a wiki, because he had realized that a lot of world-solving solutions, like people who join the Peace Corps kind of thing, 40% of the time they spend recreating the wheel of knowledge. And he thought, well, that's actually an incredibly fixable problem, because people, I could actually do something about that. And so he formed something called Appropedia, which is the opposite of Wikipedia. Wikipedia, which stores information. This is about appropriate technology that solves real-world problems. So if you're trying to build a water well in Kenya, or a safe play structure in New York City, you can actually look on this project and say, what are the best resources? How can it be built? So it gives you both sustainable resources as well as project plan. And people, literally now 20 million people a year have both contributed to and shared this initiative. And the way he started this thing was, he was like online forming this wiki, and he found like two other guys, one in Australia and one in Northern California that he, again, never met in person for many years. And they formed this little nonprofit, and they've been like doing it for a while. And the really funny part is the Gates Foundation came and said, can I give you money? And they were sort of like all virtually shrugged at each other, like, we don't even know what we would use the money for, right? Because for them, they had people in France and different parts of the world like contributing content. They had people using the content. They're like, other than server costs, this is all just stuff we can manage to do. And it proves out just how much people actually want to do this. People want to find a way to have that kind of impact, and in many different ways now there's ways to do it. And so then you just flip that on the company side and you say, how do you tap into that? So the example, I wrote a Harvard Business Case review in the magazine, and it was on the one of the cover stories a couple months back, was about TED. TED had figured out how to involve people, and when they first started, I remember being in the room when they first had this conversation about maybe some people beyond the couple thousand that come to the conference should participate in this conversation of ideas that matter, and maybe we should open this up. And they've now had over 5,000 people, but the original moment that conversation that happened in that room, they were almost looking at each other like, that person and that person and that person might be interested. I mean, it was sort of like they thought they could count them on their fingers and toes, and that's who's going to go tech. And it's become this blossoming and global effort. One of the stories that really struck me that came out of it was this person in Nairobi, Kenya, who actually lives in Kibera, which is a slum outside Nairobi, Kenya, actually got in those, I don't know what you'd call them, I don't know what the technical term is, but I call them street lights, right? Like when someone's building a freeway here, you put up those big lights late at night, and they brought those in to film their TEDx, because they didn't have electricity in the slums, and they filmed it, and it's kind of this funky filming and stuff, but they got all these local politicians to come and listen to their issues and to change policy. And I was like, That is the platform of TED that enabled TEDx participants to create ideas that mattered, shared purpose together. And all of a sudden now they have power. So TED benefits by having all this magnification. People have personal power in what they're able to do and have more meaning in their work, and policy is affected from it. That's what I'm actually saying when I say connected people can do things that once only large organizations could. It's, on many levels, all of us are getting a chance to play in a bigger game.
Yeah. Something you talk about that I think is a really interesting term, Nilofer, is this notion of structural fluidity that leads to disruptive ability, which is really what every organization is looking for. And I'm wondering if you can describe that a little bit. I mean, obviously, again, this is a big area because this is about shifting from the industrial era organization to a completely different animal. But you talk about a couple shifts that maybe we could unpack. And the first one goes back to your first point about people craving meaningful work, being at the core of this, both as something that drives individuals and something that's an opportunity for organizations. So this, I think one of the most important shifts in the world today is this shift from sort of profit as the drive to purpose as the drive. And purpose is that lovely soft topic that leaders like to talk about, but can be misinterpreted in so many ways. So when you talk about social purpose, what do you mean, and why is it such a linchpin?
So social purpose. So if you think about just you and I, right, we have each of our individual goals, and then when we're doing this together, we have something in common. So the thing in the middle between us is actually common purpose, which is the reason why we're committed to having a conversation, persevering through technology problems or whatever, right? We have some shared goals about what we want management to be, et cetera. And the same is true for both, when any party comes together, is what's that thing in the middle that causes you to commit? So what's largely happened in businesses before is we've assumed that business's job is to do stuff inside their own little silo, right? So if you follow all of Michael Porter's value chains and constructs and so on, you have a mindset inherent in those models that is, I own it and I tell you. You are the inconsequential, largely recipient of all my knowledge and perspective and abilities, right, as a company. And now when a customer can design with you, then you're not selling the thing you made together. It's not some person at the outside perimeter, but the reason that they will design with you is because they care about the same thing. So going back to the IBM example that we used a little earlier, IBM actually asked a bunch of people who cared about ecology and about the green space, say, listen, we at our scale can do something in the green space pretty significant. Can you help us design what the most impactful positive thing could be? And of course we have to make money because of course we have to be around for a year or two to do this, right? So that's a duh. But let's actually assume also that we can do something impactful. And so it's no longer a competing tension. It's more about put the thing in common that you have in common, which is we have shared interests in certain spaces. And of course, we also have to increase thrivability. Otherwise, we're not around for year two to do it again.
Sure. And so social purpose in so many ways is it's that connective tissue that creates these communities, creates these networks of value that really are the core of this era. You had the best question in your book, and one of the things I love about how you write is that you bring forth the provocative questions rather than the set answer. Because provocative questions are the key to really figuring this out for yourself. And I think one of the questions that comes up when you talk about purpose and you talk about defining this cause or this set of ideas you're advocating for that really is the glue for people inside and beyond your organization, the question comes up, how do you know when your purpose is good, when it's valid, when it really is something that's going to be this attracting and magnifying force? What does it mean to have the right kind of purpose?
Right, and I always say if it's just about what you get out of it and you disappear tomorrow, then and no one actually cares, then it's not a shared purpose, right? And it should be something that somebody's already pursuing. And so thinking about, like, do I want to help Gary Hamel be successful? as much as I might know Gary and like him or whatever, like, yeah, but if Gary's saying let's reinvent management so a whole bunch of people can thrive, there's a purpose I can get behind, right? And so all of a sudden it's thinking about what is that thing that causes a bunch of people then to want to pool their energy because they actually can't do it by themselves, but their heart takes them, their interests take them to that place. What is that, and how can you engage other people in that conversation? And as soon as you get a specific enough conversation that you might act, but a broad enough conversation where many people are interested in it, that's when you found a purpose that is bigger than you and one worth pursuing. TED, the reason I use TED as an example as a great one is they have a ideas worth spreading. And so, in fact, in their mind, they don't have to be the only one ideas worth spreading. They can amplify it in many other ways and vehicles and stuff, but that is the way in which they invite other people to come play with them.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that perspective on shared purpose changes how you think about strategy. And you talk about this notion that for so long organizations were about, how do you get the ideas right? How do you create this perfect gem of a strategy that was created around a conference table with a bunch of, big thinking executives, and then hand it down to the people who do it. In the shared purpose social world, all of a sudden the thinkers and the doers are the same people. You get more resilience, more give and take, more making it up on the fly. Can you talk about that relationship between purpose and strategy and how strategy changes in the social era?
Sure. And in fact, my first book is entirely based on this, right? It's this, so after running strategy for and behalf of major firms, right? So we get brought in after McKinsey, after the company had tried to do it by themselves for a while. And so then we would come in as sort of, I don't know, almost like last resort, like be the Hail Mary move, right? And so we would come in and say, listen, we're going to manage the process. We will not, hi, police people. We will manage the process, but we will not, and of course we'll instruct, of course we'll add our expertise, but we think the knowledge exists in your team. So the first action was to do an invitation to play and say, anyone at the company can come and participate in problem solving, and we will create the context that says, here are the ground rules by which you participate. So it's not just you can come and do anything. It's not willy-nilly. But the shared purpose is really clear. Our goal is really clear. And then we're going to actually figure out what the problem is together. We're going to identify alternatives. We're going to pick. So I use a term called murder boarding, which was the book's original name. People thought that was too mean, so it didn't get called that. But the opposite of whiteboarding is murder boarding. So getting people to actually pick together. And here's the reason all that matters is because it used to be that strategy could be this thing that would take 10 years to fold out, 5 years to fold out, some long period of time. And now things are moving so fast that there's got to be decisions that are made on the fly. And if you weren't in the room and you didn't hear all those trade-offs, then all of a sudden you look at each decision like, uh-oh, I don't know what people would want me to do here. And so then they have to bring the ball back to the original party that created the strategy. But if they were in the room, they go, oh, I know where the field goal is, and I can go get it, and I can navigate while I'm on the field with my other players to go get there. And so it's much more figuring out how to run plays, like here's what we're trying to do kind of thing. And then once you're out on the field, go do some really interesting things because you were there. Make those trade-offs. You're smart people. And so that's how strategy changes. It's because when you get people to think together, they will so go make that strategy happen, right? Execution's downhill from there. But we've often disconnected the two, strategy and execution, and I called it an air sandwich. That's what we create when we separate those two, because all the stuff that matters in the middle, like a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich, is missing. And that's what we need to do, is close the understanding and the trade-offs and the sort of things that mental powers have gone through the gears and gone, oh, this is why we made that decision.
Yeah. I mean, I love that's such a great image, and it actually brings me to something that I think you parse really well, which is, in addition to trying to get the idea right, the other thing we've been focused on, and this might be an abuse of Jim Collins, right, is getting the right people on the bus. And this new approach has a very different view of who the right people are and what the bus looks like, really, that there really is no bus and there really are no right people. So,
well, the right people are the people who care, not the people who have time.
Clarify a little bit, because everybody. Okay.
No, I was just saying the right people are the people who care. right? We've often thought about power, and the people who matter are the people who have referent title, positional power. They quote unquote should know. So we've basically said there's a group that is in the know and should be here, and what we're actually saying is there's a form of power that is about local knowledge, uh, inherent talent, creative solutions that is now not about personal charisma or about influence or about positional title, but a new form of power based on your ability to just contribute, right? So right changes. And yeah, the metaphor of the whole right people on the bus is I've often worked with teams and they say they use that phrase all the time because Jim Collins has been, hugely influential. And I go, yeah, but then it looks what you're doing is saying, well, then shut down, shut up, and let me drive. Like, I don't know very many people who want to come to work like that. And if you said that to, let's say, someone at Google, they would just roll their eyes at you, right? That's the talent economy is a group of people who wants to show up and like, show me what I can drive, and let me see where I can go on the field with you.
So speaking of how people want to show up at work, I think two really big pieces that people are understand I want to figure out is, how does what you're talking about, this whole approach, how does it change how we define the work of leadership? Because all of a sudden you're not, administering and, giving orders from on high and commanding people to execute. You're trying to unleash people's, best contribution, imagination, initiative, passion. And one of the terms that you talk about that is just brilliant is this notion of onlyness, that going forward the job of the leader is to sort of understand, appreciate, celebrate, and cultivate onlyness. And by the same token, the individual really has to get that that's your sort of best foot forward. What do you mean by that, and why is it so important?
So onlyness is just to make sure everyone's clear on what we mean by that. So each of us is standing in a spot only you're standing in. It's a function of your history, your experiences, your perspectives, your visions and hopes. So it's it's a point of view, and it is a point of view both of your past and your future. And when you bring that, then what you're going to do is bring a very distinct sort of perspective on perhaps how the problem hasn't been able to be solved in the past, or some idea about some creative solution. Until you bring that, what we're left with is the same group trying to solve, by the way, the same problem over and over again with the same resources. And what's the very definition of insanity, right? It's to keep using the same resources this time to solve the problem the same way. And so onlyness is about how do you use that capacity of each and every single person, creative source, whatever you want to call it. But I love the term of onlyness because it is really about only you. That spot only yours. I don't like uniqueness because sometimes, I think about my role as a woman on a board, for example, and people will say, well, that's a very unique point of view. And I'm like, really? 51% of the population is a woman. That is my least distinctive characteristic. It just happens to be distinct to you, and because you should let more people in the room, right? But so I don't really think about my femininity, the fact that I have ovaries as the most distinct capability, and I'm trying to get to be more. Onlyness is that very thing that's specific to you. And so how do we as leaders then draw that? And actually, Ginny Rometty of IBM has a beautiful story that she told, which was, instead of thinking about how do I go light everyone's fire, meaning like I help Polly know what Polly should do, and I help Nilofer know what Nilofer should do, and so on. How about I be the person who tends the flame, the embers of what our organization needs to do? And I tend that flame, and you come and bring your candle into that. You light it from there, and you go off into the world. And so instead of a relatively small group kind of running around trying to get everybody lined up, you allow people to come to you and know exactly what is the fuel of this organization, and then to take that much further out. And in that distributed, you can almost see the visual, right? In that distributed construct, you can have much greater impact, especially when you're aligned by purpose. So I think it actually makes the job of the leader much easier in certain ways, but it certainly changes from being the one who knows all the answers to the one who tends the culture of the organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier in the sense that you're going with the grain of human nature as opposed to against it, but it's, it probably is a little bit messier. Now, um, I'd love to sort of get to questions because we have a little time left since we have the technical difficulties. And a couple questions have come in, and they're in sync with the question that I have. So I'm going to start off with this and try to sort of put them all together, which is basically, there probably isn't the ultimate model of the social organization yet in the world. I mean, this is a moving context. It's kind of the unicorn. There's some pieces, put together in some organizations, but what would it look like if you had an organization that had figured out these parts? Creating an organization where people are drawn to it because of this shared sense of purpose, where everybody's able to do meaningful work, where rather than a scaled, static institution that has power because of its size and strength, you have something that's quite fluid and flexible and creates value in its network. What would that look like? And is there an example of anybody who's come close?
I think it's going to look like an organization that knows how to collapse and expand as needed. So Quirky, I'll use Quirky as an example of a company based in New York City doing innovation. They're actually allowing I think their tagline is something like anyone can innovate or something. And the idea is anyone can design anything from toothbrushes to cars, and they can submit ideas. People can vet those ideas and make them better, improve on them, and get compensated as the product goes through the pipeline. Quirky actually does the manufacturing and distribution, so has some mechanisms to let that happen, including like contracts with Bed Bath & Beyond and so on. And they get them out to the marketplace. So what's really interesting is you no longer have to become an entrepreneur to invent something. And it uses the power of community to make an idea better. It makes Quirky key to that in the sense of course, we have some efficiencies in the way we can help you enable that. But all of a sudden now, access to all these people's creative ideas. And so there was a 5-year-old who, when he was using the toothbrush every day and putting the toothpaste on, he was super frustrated because the motor skills required to do that is hard. So he'd get the bathroom all messy and stuff. And he said, Mom, there's got to be a better way. So he designed the way the toothpaste comes on the toothbrush so that it only requires sort of one hand and super easy. And now he brushes his teeth easier. And then more importantly, like when the toothpaste is done, the toothbrush is done, he just throws it away and then he knows he gets a clean toothbrush. And I was thinking, like the 5-year-old, first of all, I love that he was able to solve his own problem. Like, awesome. But he probably solved the problem that a whole bunch of his friends are having, right? And so right now we have very few people doing innovation in the world. We have the group that can get access to venture money. We have the group that went to Stanford. We have the group. It's a finite group, and there's a group of people who are left off the table. Certainly, people of color receive less than 3% of venture money. Women, incredibly low numbers. Also, young people. So what happens when you can unleash the potential of all that talent? And so that's what I think Quirky's enabling in that way. And so Quirky's figured out how to do a compensation model where everyone wins. So the inventor wins, the collaborators win, they win, right? And so I think it's going to look a lot like that. It's going to be ways in which you're a platform player, and the economics and stuff work, but you are flexible in terms of how big you are, how small you are, and the what doesn't matter, right? The how matters. How do you enable processes and mechanisms to allow people to work together? So it seems to me a really progressive kind of construct for how to build a company.
I love that. What a great story. I'm especially interested in self-sufficient young people, having a little one of my own. We've got another really great question in from Kate Hammer. It's sort of when she says when people within an organization are jaundiced, and often understandably so, how do you start this shift to an organization that's more connected, more collaborative, more trusting? It's where do you start the rehabilitation of the old school? Do you ever have a few starting points? How do you dip your toe in the water?
Well, I'll give the short answer and then I'll elaborate. So the short answer is choose a really tough problem that hasn't been solved another way, because that's where people are willing to give it a shot. That's the honest to God truth. And so remember, I worked at Apple, I worked at Autodesk, I was in all these bigger enterprises, and then I actually did strategy for a bunch of big enterprises. So my background is in this group. And what I learned was if it was a nice to have, nobody was willing to change their way. But if it was like, oh my gosh, we got to solve this problem, and they'd already tried and failed already, then it's like, I would always say, listen, you've tried it the other way before. And so why don't we just try it this way now? And if it sucks, we're no further off, than we were at the beginning. And people would almost always be like throwing up their hand, like, okay, fine. If it's collaboration, fine, kind of thing. Like, we've tried all the other approaches. And then when it worked because people were committed to it, and they so wanted to solve that problem. And then all I did was, as a consultant, and of course knew how specs out more of that, was just manage the process so that people could be coming to the table, could bring forth their ideas. You could see the full elephant in the room, because usually that's the problem. Most companies don't want to name the elephant. It's sitting right there, and they're like, yeah, nobody wants to have that conversation. But that creates the tug, and then those teams would go off once they had a success and describe that success, right? Because they were usually little superheroes within their organization. They would describe the success, and they would try to duplicate that solution, that approach in their next team. And that's what causes it to go viral, is the team having the win. So focus on something that's already a problem, and then focus a lot on the process and help them learn new skills. And in the mechanism, it creates change.
I love it. You get that sort of muscle memory of having had a success doing something different. I think, it's noon. I think we should declare victory. I'm so sorry, especially to Nilofer and to all of you out there, because I already said this the first time I talked to Nilofer, that we could probably talk for hours and hours on end, and maybe even better when we don't have kludgy technology in between us. But I do want to say to everyone, thank you so much for your participation. There was a lot of action on Twitter and a lot of people asking questions. And if you are inspired by these ideas, you can obviously follow Nilofer in all of her circles and read all of her books, but also join the Unlimited Human Potential Challenge, submit a hack, submit a story. All the links are right here on the page that you're looking at this Hangout on, and contact us if you have any questions. Nilofer will be reading those submissions at some point as a judge, so you'll get more interaction with her that way. So I'm going to stop the broadcast, and thank you all so much for your time and your patience today.